And we're live. Hello, everyone. This is AK coming to you with a virtually connecting session. I believe the last virtually connecting session coming from DigPed PEI. We are here with on-site buddy Autumn and Amy Collier and Susan, and with distinguished guests online. So let's head over to PEI for a quick round of introductions.
Hey, I'm Autumn Keynes, and yeah, I'm really happy to be here with all of you guys. We wrapped things up a little bit early, so it's a much more chill and kind of intimate session. I think this is going to be a good one. I'm excited.
I'm Amy Collier. I'm at Middlebury College.
And I'm Susan Adams, EdTech Insight on Twitter.
All right, AK is saying he's got a lag on his side, so I'll help facilitate. I'm Mahabeli. I'm the co-founder of Virtually Connecting, and I'm also a big part of the Digital Pedagogy Lab, or, I'm a part of the Digital Pedagogy Lab team, not a big part, just a part. Okay, so I'm just going to ask people virtually to also introduce themselves. Let's go Alex, Carol, Keith, Ken, and Lori, because that's the order I have them in. Go ahead, Alex.
Alex and Kelly, I use the VT Live account on Twitter, which is Vitrine Technologie Éducation. I live in Ottawa and I work in Montreal, and it's my second virtually connecting session. I've been following the DigPed posse, as I tend to call it, for quite a while, but I feel like a partial outsider. As an anthropologist, it kind of makes sense.
Carol, I think you're next, and we can't hear you. I don't have audio on you. You have to unmute your microphone.
Thank you. I'm Carol Yeager, and I live in Catskill, New York, upstate New York. And I met Keith Heyman in a coffee shop, I believe it was, well, anyway, in Florida, when he lived in Florida about 3 years ago. Everyone else I've either worked with online, chatted with online, or seen online. And I worked in online education with the State University of New York, since the mid-90s, I guess. Oh, and I'm a virtual human.
Welcome, Carol.
Am I next? My name is Keith Hallen, and I'm an instructor. I teach writing and literature at Middle Georgia State University in Central Georgia, United States. Hi, Autumn.
I always get excited when I get to talk to people.
Hi, Ma. Hi, Carol.
So, greetings. I guess it's my turn. Ken Bauer, Associate Professor here at Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico, originally Canadian, but I've been here for 21 years teaching computing science. So I have that geek computing science background, but a much bigger focus on pedagogy. Nice to meet everyone.
Great to see you, Keith, or Ken. I know we've been interacting through Slack and Twitter and that kind of stuff, so it's nice to see you move. And
good to see faces. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Lori McDermott. I'm at St. Norbert College. I teach creative writing, literature, and I'm the Director of Faculty Development here.
Nice to see you again, Lori. I got to meet Lori when I was in St. Norbert for the T3 conference.
By the way, is that a new hairdo? Because it's awesome.
It is a new hairdo. Thank you.
Yeah, I really like it.
Okay, so
I was asking Amy to answer this question when we got online. Amy, this is your fourth DigPed lab, and you're also teaching the design track in the UMW next month. So could you tell us a little bit about how you think this is evolving, how is each one different, and what you're looking forward to for next time?
Sure. So, yeah, I think it is my fourth DigPed event, and I think it is evolving, and not just because we are evolving, right? Like, we're changing constantly, and we're learning new things, but also because, the needs of each of the places where we go is different, right? The people, it's crazy. It's just kind of this idea of when you get a different set of people in the room, you have different challenges and different opportunities and different experiences. And those all come into play into how things play out. And what I love, I think, about DigPed is that we don't try to be too prescriptive about what we do. Like, yes, we come in with plans, we come in with ideas and activities, but we don't let that be so rigid that we can't adjust and be more improvisational. So it's almost like we develop choreography, but we make space for the improvisation of a dance. And I think that's a really important part of what makes DigPed, every DigPed, unique, and why I really, really love the participating and being part of this. I mean, in this case, I was more of a participant than anything. I led one workshop, but mostly I was just here to participate. And I took a lot away by kind of going with the flow and seeing what were people interested in talking about and where were people's interests, and I learned a lot. So it was really cool. Oh, my workshop. Sorry. Like, what am I supposed to be talking about right now? My workshop was on digital design, and we didn't really have much of a plan ahead of time of like what specifically this workshop was going to be about. It was just kind of like, well, design, and you're interested in design, so why don't you talk about design? And I only had about 40 minutes, so it's a really, really short, kind of in-your-face kind of workshop. We did mostly activities. And what I wanted to show people is that there's a tendency in higher education, and this is historical, instructional design's kind of been like this for a long time, for instructional design to be conceived as kind of a best practices thing. It's like there's a specific way of doing instructional design, you hit all the marks, you do all the things, you check all the boxes, and then you've designed something, as AK was kind of saying, like, almost like a very product-focused way of thinking about things. And what I wanted to do is to use the 40 minutes I had in the room with people to kind of break apart that idea. To say, maybe when you approach instructional design or designing something new, you don't have to start with a checklist. If it's helpful, maybe you can, right? Maybe that's a way to start. And if it's the way that keeps you from feeling overwhelmed, okay, give it a try.
Nothing against checklists.
Nothing, like checklists have their use. Learning outcomes have their use, right? Like all those things that kind of put us into tidy spaces are helpful in some ways. But what I'm trying to do, and I'm a checklist kind of person. I have a punch list is what I call it. And my punch list is something that helps me. But they all have their places. But I think we don't have enough conversations in higher education about more divergent ways of thinking, about bringing emergence and creativity and exploding the checklist into a design process. And so that was the role I felt like I needed to play. Is I could come in here and give you a bunch of checklists to follow.
But everybody's got a checklist.
But yeah, I mean, you can Google a good checklist for instructional design. But what I'd rather have happen is to have a chance for people to come in and be kind of imaginative in thinking about their work. And so I did a kind of a low-stakes drawing toast activity, just on Post-its, draw how you make toast, and then we kind of got together and people paired up and drew toast together. And it was really fun, but it got people thinking about the possibilities of how design might look different based on a lot of different factors at play. And then we did an activity where I showed them how divergent thinking might play out in like designing a dinner party, where some people, when they design a dinner party, they start with, oh, well, what's my menu? Right? And so that's kind of a checklist approach. But instead, I showed them a divergent approach where somebody said, okay, well, what if we had people bring the ingredients instead of, having a menu? People just brought ingredients and we made whatever we could with the ingredients that people brought. So just allowing people to kind of be imaginative about the kinds of things you can do when you design. So they did that activity with a course that they were thinking about. It was fun. It was very fun.
It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Yeah. One of my favorite parts of the conference.
Okay.
And it was great because I'm going to be teaching digital citizenship in the fall to first-year students. And so I was actually able to do this with my actual course, right? My actual course. And I told Amy as I'm leaving, because she had us do this in this huge piece of paper, I'm like folding it up going, no, I got to take this one with me.
Well, and one of the things that I talked about in the session was how I think one of the greatest tools for instructional design is a giant piece of paper, right? Just the ability to sit down and be kind of free with your thoughts and your ideas can be incredibly liberating. people in a period of 5 minutes came up with a ton of ideas, right?
Yeah.
Just a ton of things that, and maybe half of them were no good, but if half of them were kind of interesting, that's great. So that was really, that was fun, and I love sitting down with faculty and pulling out a giant piece of paper, because all of a sudden, everything that they thought they were coming to me to get has been changed, because that's not what they thought was going to happen. And I really like that.
Can you guys hear? Is the audio okay? I know there was a few comments. We're back. Okay?
There's just a lag. There's just a lag, so if you find a little bit of silence. So Ken and Keith are going to ask questions now, whoever manages.
Go ahead, Keith.
Okay, I can do that. I'm curious. One of the things I'm struggling with is I've been involved with Autumn and Maha and Carol with all of this RISO and AK with all this RISO stuff, and it's very open-ended. And so I have a little bit of internal tension when I'm talking. Well, how do you design a rhizome? How do you, if you're dealing with open-ended topics, especially those where there's not one right answer, there's not one way to even several answers. What role does design play in that, and how do you rethink, or do you rethink design? Are you doing something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think I haven't designed anything that looks like RISO, but I've studied RISO in the sense of kind of observed it and tried to understand how did it get to where it ended up, right? And what were the conditions that were created at the outset to make it what it ended up being? And it's hard to say. I think even Dave might say he would have a hard time saying exactly what he did that made it so flourish in such a way. But I think one of the things that he did was he gave himself permission to try something and to retract it later, to make a space where things weren't totally defined at the outset, to be open and transparent about that with people in the course, to say, look, we're going to start here, but maybe starting here isn't the right place. And maybe you have a different starting point, and could you help us understand that? So, I mean, I would say one of the things that people often, when I talk about designing in this way, people often say, well, first of all, what about the learning outcomes? How are you going to get to learning outcomes? We're very tied to that notion. And second, like, how do people succeed in that kind of environment? And I think a lot of it depends on who you're talking about in terms of your students in the class, what level of comfort and freedom do they feel in unconstrained environments. I think there are a lot of students who you put them in an unconstrained environment, and it's very threatening to them and whatever, right? So you have to think through those questions too. But one of the things I've tried to do is I struggle with learning outcomes. I have a tension around them. Like, I see their value, and I struggle with the formulaic approach in which they are applied. I've actually seen tools that people have built online to help people, like, insert verb here, insert outcome here, and it like produces your learning outcomes here. And I'm like, God, that is not what this is not what we intended for learning outcomes to be. So what I like to think about is learning outcomes being the dreams. What are the dreams that you have for the students? What, at the end of this, not how can they show you, but how can you be tickled? How can you be thrilled? How can you and your students find absolute immense joy in the things that are happening in this course? That being the thing that drives learning outcomes. And I think, my sense is things like RISO and things like other courses that have had these more emergent feelings probably started more along those lines than along learning outcomes.
I feel like there needs to be a balance, and there's some type of like natural tension between this idea of planning and wanting to have a specific outcome, but then also, I mean, this conference wrapped up an hour early. We're like an hour and a half early because, it just felt like it was time to wrap things up, so we wrapped it up, right?
This reminds me. Go ahead, Autumn.
Just allowing yourself the freedom to let things shift, using planning and using specific constructs that are probably going to be really great in terms of efficiency, where they're best needed, but also allowing yourself freedom.
I'm really curious.
This reminds me a little bit of a comment or a question that one of my students had this summer. You know, what is the line between instructional design and teaching or facilitation? Is there a line? What does that look like? Because a lot of students in my course are instructional designers, maybe in a corporate setting where they don't do the instruction, and some of them are, let's say, in higher ed where they also do the instruction. So there's that aspect that we don't often talk about in instructional design of the actual implementation, the actual doing and running the course and being there and having that sense in the room, be it a virtual or a physical room, to figure out, well, should I make this a little faster, shorter? Should I convene? Should I keep going?
That is a great question, and I think, you know, it's certainly something that the instructional designers who I've worked with, who I would consider to be some of the most, I don't use the word effective because that's not what I mean, but the most kind of, who bring out the best in the faculty and the courses that they work with. They are people who have taught or understand what it means to teach and understand it very intimately. And I think the best outcomes in terms of an instructional design process that I've seen are where the instructional designer and the teacher are either the same person or continue to work together as collaborators and partners in the course. I think that those are where I see the most exciting things come out.
Mm-hmm. I often think I want to work out of my job, but my teachers become instructional designers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that instructional design, because it is kind of considered to be this separate field, and in some ways it's been referred to as a paraprofessional field, which I think is a really terrible way of talking about a really instrumental function of teaching and learning. And so I think that we've got to, and I feel like if we keep living by the checklists and living by these really rigid approaches to instructional design, we're not helping the evolution of this field out of what's considered to be paraprofessionalism.
I think Ken's got a question for us.
So some great points there on over-specifying and determining the path to the goal when you determine the goal too much. And I struggle with that as a software engineer because I teach software engineering, and I believe it's more of an art than an engineering. But that's my real question. I'll throw a curveball. I saw you tweet out unpleasant edu yesterday, so I'm very curious about how to design intended examples of design intended to stop unwanted behaviors in digital education. I saw that, and there's nothing really following that, so I'm really curious.
Yeah, so after we did the activities, I said, you know, one of the reasons why thinking divergently in instructional design is important is because it opens up questions around things like embodiment and beauty and play and what was the other one? And gathering. Like, those are concepts that we don't talk about in typical instructional design circles, but I felt like when you start thinking divergently, those come up. And I said, interestingly enough, they also open up questions about, like, the ways in which we design for, as you were saying, for things not to happen, or for unwanted behaviors not to happen. And just by coincidence, when we were driving from Vermont to Montreal to get on a flight from Montreal to Charlottetown, we listened to podcasts on our way into Montreal. And one of the podcasts that we can listen to in our car is called 99% Invisible, because it doesn't have a lot of language, so I don't feel bad making my son listen to it. And there was this episode on 99% Invisible, I think it's the latest one, about unpleasant design. There's a book that's out. And on 99% Invisible's website, you can see a blog post where they have pictures, which, I mean, once you watch it, it's hilarious, the pictures of, like, designs of public spaces to keep people from doing specific kinds of behaviors. One of the really interesting ones, so like there's lots of examples of like park benches and things like that, but one of the really interesting ones, they don't know if it's really unpleasant design or not, but they said that there was a trend, maybe in the 90s, to put pink lighting in public places where they didn't want teenagers to hang out, because they felt like pink lighting exposed blemishes in skin. And so you've got these people who don't want, you've got teenagers who don't, already have maybe blemished skin and skin issues. They were trying to keep people out of those places.
It reminds me of the 1980s when they were playing really, really bad music outside of the 7-Elevens to drive away the teenagers.
Yes, right.
I'm aging myself, but...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And, so my point was that we need to start having a conversation about where are designs happening in education, instructional designs happening in education, and they're happening in such a way because we're trying to prevent unwanted behaviors. And what are we doing? Like, what does that mean? And can we problematize that a little bit, right? And so I was thinking, maybe we could have a hashtag out there that's unpleasant.edu as a way to look, for people to share examples of unpleasant design in education. I think it'd be really super fun if we could do that.
We need to make it happen. Let's
do it. Let's do it. And it's a really good podcast episode, even if you don't listen to any of the other ones they do. Really good episode.
What's the name of the podcast?
The podcast overall is called 99% Invisible. It's run by a design company, and they look at kind of the hidden stories behind design, which is really cool. But then this particular one is called Unpleasant Design.
I tweeted out the link to that particular episode because I got really, really curious. So, and I put it in here in the chat, so people should be able to find it. Okay, there's a lot going on in the chat in this session. Like somebody has to save the chat. I can't even keep up with it. But whoever wants to talk next.
Always remember to save the chat. GHO removes it.
Right.
Well, I guess I'll bite, because the part about unpleasant design makes me think about the fact that we do focus on satisfaction, measuring satisfaction by students. So student evaluations really are that. They're really about satisfaction, and even teaching effectiveness, it's still about the goals in view of the administration, not lifelong learning, not this kind of what will eventually happen. The learning outcomes at the end of the semester are one thing, but years down the road, like, we change people's lives all the time, and sometimes they tell us in the class. It happened to me in a class where I had no learning outcomes. Students were not necessarily satisfied, and I sense a lot of tension, but a lot happened, and people were really, really, doing a lot of stuff. It was a course about Africa, but they learned a lot more about themselves than about Africa, which was fine with me. But at the same time, if my job is to satisfy the criteria set down, which, after teaching years about Africa, like, I know it doesn't make sense. Like, people don't get it. Like, they think of Africa, of the continent, as a continent to be helped. So if I make a difference by just, tweaking a few things, it's much more important, but it's not satisfying. So we tend to put students and learners in general in a situation of comfort and oriented towards a satisfaction that's, oh, they enjoyed my course, they're still hanging out with me. And some people who are maybe, it's not about grades necessarily, but they're maybe harsher in some ways, they get another reputation, and we kind of have a problem with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that one of the, whoever said that learning was supposed to be always easy or challenge-free, right? Like, isn't transformation kind of hard and a lot of times uncomfortable?
It hurts sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's truly transformational change often requires major reevaluation of the things that you believe before, which means questioning things that you don't really feel comfortable questioning yet. And I think you're right that one of the biggest inhibitors to faculty adoption of change is that the incentives that we put in front of faculty to help them stay in their jobs and get promotion and tenure, and I say this we, globally, right, are also the things that keep them from trying new things, right? Wouldn't it be interesting if we had a tenure and promotion system that really motivated the kind of change that we hoped students would also undergo?
This reminds me a little bit of what my colleagues who are instructional designers in higher ed have to deal with because they put together a lot of interesting workshops and opportunities for faculty to hone their teaching and to try new things, but at the same time, those are not the things that are rewarded by promotion and tenure committees. So these workshops go unfilled or canceled, and instructional designers are kind of scratching their head and saying, well, why isn't anybody attending?
There's a real tendency, I think, among instructional designers and folks like instructional designers, people who do the kind of work that we do, to blame faculty, to kind of turn it into a, well, faculty never this, and faculty never that, and those darn faculty. And I resist that as well, because I don't think, one, I don't think that's a particularly productive way of thinking about people if you want to work with them. And two, it doesn't capture the complexity of the environment that we're all working in. And it creates this tension, this animosity of us-them kind of thing that just doesn't get at the real issues. It just makes us not like each other very much, which I don't like that. I like liking people. I'm a nice person.
I like you, and I have nothing but good things to say about it. It's a great experience. So I know that you guys kind of touched on this in your track a little bit today. So Susan was in the networks track, Amy and I were in the digital literacies track. I do feel like a lot of this is, pushed by accreditation and that push toward efficiency. And I know a lot of that is, it seems like everybody I talk to about that ends up saying, yeah, that's where it's coming from, and that's really a bummer because it's not me, it's that guy, right? All the way up to it basically where it stopped for me is the government, right? The government is kind of making us do this. So I don't know. I'm kind of curious how you guys dealt with that in your track, because we weren't there.
Well, I was going to bring up the question too, Amy, that maybe other instructional designers on this call have too, which is that constraint of the learning outcomes. And in the design world, there's this new driver called quality matters, which is maybe not new, but they've been in our institution. And our networks track, blew that out of the water, and really helped me to see how problematic that is, although I knew it from the beginning. But speaking to the complexity of faculty pressures, I sit with faculty who often struggle just to figure out alignment and are pushed into these boxes that Quality Matters is requesting. And yet there are these 8 standards within them, a lot of standards within, and I have tried to leverage the ones that work well, like asking for ADA compliance, which was never asked of before, but that's a standard that actually I appreciate, and it brought that conversation to the table by the very nature of the rubric standard being in existence. And yet, watching them try to go through these standards and then the overlay of alignment that goes in that has increased to some ways the instructional design process, helping faculty to actually make more intention to their courses. So I have seen the value in what I'm challenged very much by what I just experienced and what I know of our community to really want to get back to what you're saying is that emergent, discoverable spaces. And I know I'm going on, but one little last question to summarize is I do believe, and I'm looking for, ways to actually go through the rubric as portal, into the possibility of still creating that emergent and discoverable, but allowing my faculty and supporting what they're beholden to in getting the score and passing the QM standard to be stamped on.
Right. And
I had. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna point to you and say I think you also had something to add.
So I was just thinking about. I lost part of that conversation, but the thing about the accreditation software is called Compliance Assist. I don't know if it's the same for everybody else, but just the name of that.
For everybody.
Compliance Assist, and our accreditation person just goes ahead and says it in meetings with a straight face. I just thought, you're just saying that, and you don't feel weird saying that? But the thing is that all this documentation of learning outcomes, putting things on the system, is such an illusion that if you document it, then you know what's happening in the classroom, and you have no idea. You tell someone to write a syllabus in a particular way because that's the way you want to see the syllabus. It tells you nothing about what's happening inside the classroom. And I actually go into our blended learning committee meetings and I say, I'll write whatever you want on the syllabus and I'll do whatever I want in my class. And that's what I do. I mean, I make my syllabus as untraditional as I possibly can within limits. I'll try to stretch my learning outcomes so that they don't sound all measurable and all that kind of thing that I'm supposed to help faculty do. And I'll tell faculty you can write it however they want it and do whatever you want in the end. And yeah, I'm encouraging that because they're supposed to be teaching the students so that the students learn, not so that the accreditation people give them the accreditation, but they need the accreditation so that the students come to the university, right? So it's this tension, and the problem is that I don't think there's someone in the middle, like the people in the university communicating with the accreditors, who are missing the disconnect. You know, that this isn't necessarily what's helping learning. So what's wrong with that? You know?
Yeah, and I think this is such an interesting issue, right? Because you're right that the motivation that universities and colleges have to meet the specific things an accreditor requires is very strong for a lot of reasons.
It's a lot of work.
And in a lot of cases, at least at some of the institutions I've been at, we don't have people who are designated specifically to address accreditation. Mm-hmm. It's somebody else's. It's in addition to a job that they're doing, right? Mm-hmm. So every few years they have like a whole other job placed with them. So there is a tendency to want to just check the boxes, right? Because that's at least a way in which you can signal something. And I think signaling is an interesting way to think about things like quality matters, rubrics, and accreditation standards, as they are signals, but they aren't actually the real representation of the thing that, because honestly, we still just don't know enough to know exactly what we're talking about. My big issue is when we say, okay, well, let's check those boxes and we're done, right? And we assume that that tells the story. And we have not done our jobs if we let that be the story. The story cannot be that. And so the question is, how do we start to tell a story that looks different than just what's captured on the checkboxes and the accreditation reviews? How do we get narrative in there? How do we get not just stories in the sense of like anecdotes, but how do we show the kind of data that there are rigorous methodologies behind, but are data that tell us a lot more about lived experience than they tell us about changes of state recognition, which I think is where we stop.
But I think that's the question that. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead. Very quickly. Just, I think we always need to be challenging the unification of standards, of the universality of standards of what's good, because what's good in a certain context is different than what's good in a different context, and that's one of my biggest problems with external accreditation or external evaluations of what happened. Go ahead, Ken.
And that's really why I pushed myself to write that blog post about my students' comments. It's most of it in Spanish there, but it's giving the students a voice and making that part of the evaluation of what went right and what went wrong in our courses is way more important than what we measure with measuring sticks.
But I wonder, is there some value, I guess, in, like you were saying, hire somebody to do the measuring with the measuring sticks, right? Because like the government needs you to do that. Let that become a person's job, right? And let the educators do what the educators do. I don't know.
So one of the things that I missed part of this because I dropped out, but one of the things that I've noticed, having worked on a variety of ends in the university, is this going back to the us versus them, and sometimes it's between faculty as well. So whenever I've brought up the an issue of, well, we're all colleagues here. Maybe we can look at each other's courses and provide feedback. And the immediate response tends to be, well, two of them. One, academic freedom. I've got the right to do whatever in my class. And B, I don't want to be police for any of my colleagues. And it seems to me that people are framing the issue wrong. Instead of looking at something as a colleague and as a positive comment, they immediately go toward the negative.
Yeah, I think there is such a tradition of, and again, I think it comes back to the ways in which faculty are promoted, is that it tends to be a fairly competitive process, right? And that the ways in which scholarship and grants and all the things that faculty, again, are kind of rated on are competitive processes. And so in the realms where there can be some kind of concern about oversight into their work, I think legitimately they get nervous about that. And I think one of the things that we did in the workshop that I thought was when we did the draw toast process, and we immediately, like, they did a little bit of kind of self drawing of toasts and building post-it notes and stuff, and then within like 3 minutes later, we paired up and started to have, you know, them build a process together. And then we talked about the way their process changed as a result of being interactive with another person. And I think if we can build more ways in which faculty start to work with each other before a course is created, like at the beginning, starting to create, you know, what we might call communities of practice, where it's not about somebody coming in and looking at your course and evaluating. It's about the fact that we have so much to gain from each other when we start to share with each other. Changing the culture of academic preparation to be more collaborative, I think, could help a lot. And I think institutions where instructional design groups have had the opportunity to be more collaborative with faculty, team teaching and team development happens a little bit more readily than it does maybe in places where an instructional design group might just be building something and handing it back to somebody else, right? Mm-hmm. So that might be a charge to all of us to work on our instructional design teams to be more collaborative rather than shops where things get put in and taken out.
I want to check in with you. We've been going for about 40, and you. We've been going for about 45 minutes now. I know you have your son here, and like, yes. and the conference is over. Are you guys okay with going maybe just for a couple more minutes and then wrapping things up?
Sure, just a couple more minutes would be fine.
Okay.
If there's anything else.
And Omaha isn't there anymore to actually wrap up the session is the problem.
Probably talking to
I guess I can.
And AK
I can do a quick wrap up.
Okay.
So one last thing about instructional design, just getting out of crystal balls here. Where do you think instructional design is going in the next, I don't know, 5 years?
Oh man.
Take it away. Sunset question.
I don't know. I don't know. Futures questions are always difficult for me because I mean I love imagining. I love thinking about the future, but then I always worry. I get context collapse is the problem, right? Yeah. And then I think, oh, somebody's gonna come back 5 years from now, watch this video, and be like, oh, I'm so wrong.
I have a signal. I have a signal to share. I've been in the job hunt for a few months now, and just received a new job actually at Yale University, where I'm going to be the designer. Thank you. Pretty excited. And through my process of interviewing with a variety of institutions in the United States, I have discovered what appears to be an intentional strategy to bring together the instructional design team closer with the ITG offices or the educational technology offices that are either running the LMS or really doing kind of the help desk, together with educators that are instructional designers. And often I've also seen even like a digital humanities lab, if there is one on a campus, to also be close, literally, physically. They're renovating buildings to allow for physical office space to birth an incubator type of situation where they will allow emergent collaborations to occur. And I think that signals to me what you were saying and suggesting, which is the importance of building relationships with your faculty and get yourselves on the curriculum planning committee meetings and having relationships with the program directors to say, here's what I can bring to the table, and here's what it could look like if I were at the table.
I like that so much. I'm so glad that you are seeing that out there in the world. Because getting back to that tension between, I mean, it's kind of like objectivity and subjectivity, right? It's kind of like efficiency and creativity. And if we're going to resource one, if the government is telling us that we've got to resource one, we've got to resource the other one, because the other one's just as important. And maybe we can't measure it, maybe we can't show it as cleanly as clearly, but we need to start resourcing that other side of things because it's just as important.
Thank you.
Great way to end.
So with that, we'll be wrapping up this last DigPed Virtually Connecting session. I would like to thank everybody who attended both virtually and from PEI. Of course, we're all virtual in this. That's a question and philosophical point for another time. Thank you all and have a great weekend.
All right, if you guys want to keep talking, feel free. We just got to run.
Thanks.